Alright, in general, this is a review for switching from Mac OS to System 76 as a web developer and my experiences with that. So it's almost like a review of, or a comparison of System 76 versus Mac OS. I am using the Oryx Pro, so there will be a few things that are specific to the Oryx Pro, but I think in general this should apply to the Galago Pro and some other machines that System 76 puts out. Let's start by looking at the pros for System 76 or Pop OS. And again, specifically, I was using the Oryx Pro. For the first Pro, though, I used a different machine where I could do both Mac OS and Pop OS on the same hardware to get a good idea of how I felt. And the speed of the Pop OS was a lot snappier than the Mac OS. The animations and stuff were smoother. It was easier to get around, and things seemed to generally load faster for me trying to get work done. Now, this was on a machine that had an i5 that was fairly old. It's probably 3 years old or so, three generations back, possibly four. The pricing for me was literally $1,200-ish to go with this instead of the most recent MacBook Pro. And the most recent MacBook Pro's processor isn't nearly as fast as this one. I shouldn't say not nearly as fast, but the percentage gap is pretty big for this year's spread on the CPU upgrades. One thing that was surprising that I enjoyed and think is superior about Pop OS is they have one button to open up both your search, your display of all the windows that you have open, workspace, and your dock, or like app dock. So normally on Mac OS, I have my app dock hidden, and then you have to put your cursor to whatever, the bottom or the left or whatever, in order to make it pop out. But just with one press of the super key for Pop OS, you get your app bar, you get your search, which is basically the equivalent of what's it called, Spotlight. And Mac, you get all of the windows and you get your desktops over here. And I find this to be extremely helpful. Whoops. So you can just search for whatever application you want. I found this better to be in one place. It's easier, there's less to think about. It's all there. One thing that I really liked is there was some nice looking dark themes that came along with Pop OS / GNOME. I would recommend for everybody starting in Pop OS, there's a program, I think it's called GNOME Tweak. GNOME Tweak. Yes, GNOME Tweaks. So that will allow you to change the theme as well as some other things. And, sorry, that opened up in another window. Bring that over. So right here, if you go out, appearance, you can go into here and you can change the different themes. So this is the default pop theme right here. They have a pop dark, and this one's really good. In some ways, this one's better than the one that I'm using, which is this one. In that, if you go to Firefox, there's some applications, I actually can't think of one now, but there's some websites where the box is black and the text is like a dark gray, and it makes it extremely hard to read the text. Now with the Pop OS dark theme, they do a little bit better job of, I mean, it's still kind of dark between the two, but if one of those types of boxes ever pops up, it's still fairly legible with their skin. So that is a pretty big deal. So there's some rough edges on on some of these themes, but I really like this one. So that is the one I'm using, and I did enjoy having that option. Another feature that I actually found was absolutely amazing is being okay. So if you use SSH a lot, which I do, let's do this. If you use the config for your SSH, so okay, so if you do a config and you add a server in order to use with SSH, then it will automatically work with your file browser. So if you could do, I think it's Control L to bring this up, but if I go SFTP and I say just the name that I named my server, then bam, it shows up and I can navigate in here as if I was on the machine that I just SSH'd into. So one thing that ended up being amazing as well was the ability to add, I guess you could say, icons or app icons extremely easily, and this has improved my workflow. Now that's a terrible description, so I will show you what I mean by this. So if you went into the App Store and you install, I think it's just called like main menu. So you install a main menu. Say a lot of times you need to get to your GitHub profile page, so we could just go like this. Okay, so then we can go to add a menu, and I'll just do a new item. We'll just say test, and the command we'll do is Firefox, and we'll give it that path that I just did, and then bam. So from now on, if you just pressed your super key and typed in test, bam, you could open up this website. And this works with all kinds of scripts. So for example, I have a project that I work on commonly, and I open up my web browser with two websites, a terminal in the right window, and open up tmux, and also VS Code. So now if I go, let's say flashcards, it'll open up the terminal that I wanted. Oh, I see. So I have two screens open. It opened up code, VS Code, and it also opened up a new Firefox window with the two websites that I want to use regarding that project. So that's amazing. I should probably do a video on my desktop environment and the customizations. It might be helpful to some people, but that was really convenient. So anything that you would make a bash script for, you can just, it's so quick to just make a icon that you can quickly search for and have it pop up. The keyboard I actually thought was better than my Mac keyboard. It has some travel, but it's still very light to the touch. I've had keyboards in the past that I really disliked, that were hard to push the buttons down, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think when you put 12, 14, 16 hours in a day and you're on it, I don't know, it'd affect my wrists and whatnot. But I do really like the Apple keyboards. I know some people don't like it because they don't have much travel. I still love them, but I actually do like this Oryx Pro keyboard better. It is nice to have all of the Linux commands from switching to actually using Linux. And so, like, for instance, a lot of times if I want to know where something, like if I want the path of something while I'm in the command line, I do like a read link F music. This would give me, you know, the directory that it's in, and that is actually not a big deal, but there's a lot of these little commands that I can use that I can't use on Mac, and that's been nice. Also with Mac, if you want to open up an application, you can't usually just do like code, you know, say I wanted to open up this folder, it'd just be code dot whatever. Sorry, that was opened in another window, but usually that doesn't work. It's like open -A and then like the name of a program, and then it may even be the path of the program, I can't remember, and then arguments for that program. I don't know. It's just kind of convoluted, and it's nice in Linux that you just type the name of the application and go. So I'd say in general, I have felt more at home with Linux, and it's tailored to the things that I like. And there's a risk, like in the past, I've spent a lot of time trying to customize things, like a tiled window manager and a lot of other things, and I'm in danger of spending too much time trying to customize, and it ends up taking up more time than it's going to save. This time I tried to take the approach that, hey, I'll just use Pop! OS. I'll try to use almost everything out of the box. Well, you know, most of what's out of the box, but where I see pain points, maybe I should spend some time to make things quicker or easier on me. And I feel that approach has worked out. I started using, so I got the Oryx Pro. Gosh, I actually don't know exactly when I got it. It feels like it's been about 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks. But before I even did that, I switched to Pop! OS on another machine, and I was using that for a while. So that gave me some time to get used to the OS, so I could talk a little more intelligently about it now. Yeah. So definitely more customization's been good. The best way I can actually put it, I think, is if Mac OS, if getting on it and you're spending a ton of hours in using Mac OS, if that's like your house, it feels like this is more like being in your room, where things are a little more customized towards you, and it feels more ergonomic to the things that you're doing if you take a little bit of time in order to customize things. So the cons of my experience, I'd say there's more rough edges with Linux or with Pop! OS. There's more rough edges. Every once in a while, the App Store crashes, which I don't use very often anyways, and then I have to force quit it. When I install Docker, normally it's just like a quick normal installation on Mac OS. When installing it on Linux with Pop! OS, since you have a more up-to-date version of Ubuntu, it's like Docker was harder to install, and you'd actually have to have some knowledge about adding PPAs and notice that their stable version of the PPAs, which is kind of like what their tutorial lays out, doesn't have a Docker version for Linux. So you have to add like a Edge version at the end in order to get the installation working. So all that to say, there's some nuances when you want to get something done. I feel like every once in a while something will come up that you'll spend about 2 hours. For me, I'll spend about 2 hours on, in order to understand the issue and fix. And with Mac, there's like very little of that. Or when there is something like that, it tends to be specific to trying to set up a dev environment, um, or something else that isn't necessarily like Mac OS related. Whereas Linux, it feels like a few times, there'll be some things that are like Linux related problems that you have. For one of my Bluetooth devices, it doesn't automatically connect, and I don't know why, but it's a pretty off-brand headset. So that was kind of annoying, but it's not like a huge deal. I mean, I just have to go into settings and connect to it. It's not massive, but that was kind of a negative. It's definitely louder than Mac when you are doing something CPU intensive. The fan doesn't bother me. It's not like crazy loud, but it's definitely audible, and you'll hear it. All right. So if we look at this, I'm on high performance and I'm using the graphics card. So in general, if you're going to hook up to an external screen, you're required to be on the NVIDIA graphics mode, and that in and of itself I find makes noise as far as the fan's concerned. Now if you go into battery life for this setting and Intel graphics, then I don't hear anything. I spend most of my time actually, if I'm doing lighter stuff, with those settings, and then I don't hear anything. Oh, my Magic Mouse doesn't work with the Oryx Pro, which it doesn't work with Linux in general. I think there might be some ways to make it work, but I have always loved the Magic Mouse because you can scroll vertically horizontally. Next, let's talk about what the Mac has that the Oryx Pro / Pop OS environment didn't have, and aka stuff that I miss about Mac. So the build quality of Macs are out of this world. It's not even close. Comparing the Oryx Pro and Mac as far as build quality. For example, like where screws go, there's like these cap covers, and they don't look the smoothest. I don't know, in general the design's not just out of this world. It's good enough and I'm fine with it. But with the Apple, I don't know, I really love how things look, and the build quality is like extremely high. So speakers. The speakers aren't as good. I was happy enough with them, but on my Apple, most definitely the speakers were better. The trackpad was better on the Mac. This trackpad on the Oryx Pro is good enough, and it's good enough to not bother me. Whereas the Apple one is straight up fantastic. Obviously the Mac is quieter. I had mentioned that. I feel like with the Mac out of the box, you'll reap the benefits of the OS quicker. Like, for example, the thing that I was mentioning for installing Docker, how that took a little bit of time. That took a little bit of time, and there's kind of a trade-off with Linux in general. It's like you spend that time to learn these things. And by the way, if you actually learn what the issue was, for example, the Docker install, that's not going to bother you so much later because you'll know how to do it. But there's some initial investment in putting that time in and customizing your system where you really start feeling the benefits of Linux over Mac. So with Mac, it's like you pretty much just hit the ground running, and there's maybe less to learn. Although if you didn't want to customize things, it's not like, you know, a terribly difficult thing most of the time in order to get anything done in Linux. So so a massive thing for a lot of people is going to be the software that's supported. So I own a program called Sketch, and I can't use that. Although the Sketch isn't even on Windows either, so that wouldn't even be an option. So that's a pretty big bummer that I can't use Sketch. There is a alternative program that works on all systems called Gravit, and this looks a lot like Sketch, and I used it for something really small, and it was good, but I don't know how good it is, or if it lacks a lot of features or not. But for what I needed to get done, Grav was good, and it was a good replacement for that, for Sketch. Obviously, if you want Photoshop or Illustrator, it's annoying. It'd be nice to have the Mac instead of Linux, but really you could just run a virtual machine for, say, Windows and use Photoshop or Illustrator if it's something that you use every once in a while, which would be my case. It's pretty rare, and if I have to do something, it's only like touching it up. But if you spend a lot of time in Photoshop or Illustrator, I'd go Mac. Yeah. It would suck to just run it all in a virtual machine the whole time. Another thing I miss from the Mac is copy and paste being C and Command V in the terminal. So you use Control C and Control V on Linux, and I think Windows as well. But the problem is when you're using a terminal, Control V and Control C might be used for something else, so they don't allow you to use those to copy and paste stuff in the terminal. You have to hold Shift, Control C, Control V, which is kind of annoying. That sounds like a petty thing, but when you're copying and pasting in the terminal, like, I don't know, 25 times a day, to me it makes at least a little bit of a difference. So, on switching over, I guess there's a few tiny tips that I would give. It almost deserves its own video. I could probably talk a decent amount about switching between the two, but one thing that I found incredibly helpful is, so on the keyboard you have a super key, alt key, and then the space. Well, Mac, that's slightly different. It's like the alt key, the super key or command key, and space. You can swap those to be exactly like the Mac is, which for me, since I'm pressing super all the time to search for an application or to open up a website, I love super being right next to my thumb, on, like, next to the spacebar key. Yeah, for me that's a big deal. So in order to do that, if you use that Tweak app that I was talking about, and go to keyboard and mice, additional layout options, and Alt-Win key behavior. If you Alt is swapped with Win, that will do that for you. Also, I don't usually use cap lock, so I swapped Control over to be cap lock as well, Control instead of it being cap lock, and that helps me do my copy paste stuff in an easier way. Let's see. Oh yeah. So another negative actually about the Oryx Pro is it shows fingerprints, and it's actually pretty bad. I found if I take if I just dip a paper towel in coconut oil and I rub just the thinnest, um, just rub the thinnest layer of coconut oil on the Oryx Pro, fingerprints don't show up as easy. And when it eventually starts running out, you'll get like negative fingerprints, but those are a lot lighter than the oily fingerprints that you would get. And it feels fine, and it gives it like a little shine. But this is not a perfect solution. It still leaves fingerprints, and it's kind of annoying. So that is definitely a negative. If somebody actually has a solution of something you can put on things to prevent fingerprints from showing up, I would actually like to know if you could say in the comments. Okay, you can change the... Oh yes, also you can change the scroll to match Apple's scroll for the trackpad. So if you go into the normal settings, you go to devices, mouse trackpad, natural scrolling. If you turn that on, it's kind of like the Apple scrolling, which I don't think is better or worse. It was just something that I was used to, that's all. Out of the box experience was fantastic. I have had roughly 3, maybe 4 laptops in the past with Linux, and a lot of times there's things that don't quite work right. For one example, and the worst of which was a laptop that it would only boot up in Linux sometimes, and I would have to try booting up like 3 times, and eventually it would boot up into the OS. Now that was a nightmare, and I spent a lot of hours trying to figure out why that was the case, and never did. It wasn't as bad because I was using it as a server, so it was rare when it ever went down, like was being shut off. But that is a risk that I did not want to take. I didn't want to buy a laptop not knowing if something like that would be the case. And other situations where it was just difficult in order to get drivers set up correctly for something to work. But most everything you can figure out, but do you want to spend 2 days doing so? And for me, the answer is definitely no. So I've had a lot better experience when building my own machines, though. So I've had one desktop that I installed Linux on that was like an Alienware, and that was an absolute nightmare. But I got it to work. I literally had to do, I don't know, I'm not going to go into it, but it was terrible. But usually, if I build a system from scratch, I tend to run into a lot less problems, but still some driver stuff every once in a while. But building your own computer, I would probably just do it myself rather than buy System 76 for me personally. But a laptop, I would definitely go with them if I wanted to get another laptop again. Or if you weren't going to go with System 76, I would at least look and see if somebody else has installed Linux or the distro that you want, and see if they've ran into any issues. Oh yeah, so there's a lot of small things that are required to work correctly in order for me to be okay with switching to a machine, and I am okay with switching to the Oryx Pro instead of using a Mac. And I guess some things are like, the Bluetooth has to work properly, detecting, trackpad gestures are kind of important to me. Like, can you scroll to the side? Can you scroll up and down? Things like that. It's nice to have the two, you can do the 2 fingers, and that's like a right click, almost like it is with Mac, or the single tap for the left click. And there's a lot of small other things that just went right that I won't even mention. But they've definitely done a good job. I was impressed. I think I mentioned it before, but a lot of times in the past, depending on the project I'm on, I would use a bunch of Docker containers. I didn't get the chance to test that with this because I wasn't working on said projects. So, unfortunately, yeah, I didn't test that. Okay, so let's get to who should buy a Mac and who should go with a 76, like System 76 machine, or at least in my opinion. So I think somebody who wants to ignore the OS, just get heads down as fast as possible and get productive and going immediately, the Mac OS is a better decision for that type of person. I think anyone who is okay with not having as much power, or if they want a good amount of power, are ready to spend like an extra grand or whatever it takes in order to get that power, then Mac would be fine for you. Someone who wants a machine that's like just the highest quality as far as anything external, like the design of the machine, the quality of feel, the trackpad, the speakers, just something that is very well thought out and designed, then definitely, you know, you'd want to gravitate towards the Mac. So as far as System 76, I think that would be for anybody who would be all right with spending some time customizing their environment and wanted it ergonomic to how they use their computer. And in addition to that, that would speed up your processes for doing things, like I guess within the hour, but that requires time to do those customizations outside of that. So anybody who wants a system that's more tailored to them, I think System 76 would be a better choice. And anybody who wants speed and price, or a smaller price point, wants those two things, then System 76 is worth considering as well. And of course, as mentioned before, if anybody has software that they specifically have to use that is on Mac, then of course Mac would have to be your choice as well. I really see the value proposition for the Galago Pro, because if we look, let's just bring up the website here. For me, the Oryx Pro is definitely the right choice. But I think one of the biggest crowds that System 76 would really be valuable for is somebody who's trying to save money and not dump a ton into a computer, but they still want to do development, say like web development, or a lot of other developments, because ultimately a lot of our software gets put onto Linux machines. So the Galago Pro, so if you look at this, and if I were to set one up, let's say I wanted like a normal dev machine, I'd probably want 16 gigs of RAM. I think that would be worth it, and an NVMe drive. Those two things I think are important. So we're looking at $1,153. If I went to the Apple's website and you were willing to spend $1,150, first of all, you couldn't even get a MacBook Pro. Yeah, I mean, first you couldn't even get a MacBook Pro. So you'd have to go with Air or something, which are, their processors aren't even i5s and i7s. They're like something else. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what you would buy. Maybe an older used Mac, you could do if that was your price point. But that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, if you're gonna be do development and you want to spend around $1,000 for a machine, I don't know if I'd go Mac at all. So my final feelings on everything. I believe that more people than not would enjoy being in Mac OS and buying an Apple computer. I think that gap is smaller than most people would think it would be. I think the systems, being Linux, Pop OS versus OS X, are a lot closer than they are different, and things have gotten a lot better, both in Linux over the years in general, and I think Pop OS or System 76 has done a good job to make the OS pretty darn good right out of the box, which is a massive positive to me. And for me personally, I think it comes down to, with this Oryx Pro, I like the internals of my machine more than I did before, and with Apple, I would like the externals more. And for me, the internals are more important. Now, I know, and the reason why I say maybe more people than not would rather have Mac OS, I think the internals are just slightly harder to deal with when something unstraightforward pops up. But for me, just getting extra customization to help speed up my workflow that Mac doesn't have makes it feel more personalized, and I enjoy it more.